Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. Rafegal. This is not what I thought it was going to be, and we're not going to do it. There's an enemy there called Intanger, which actually gives you 10 magic points per kill, which is really good. However, it will murderize you very quickly. So we're just not gonna fight it. It's like a little mini side boss thing. It has like 32,000 health and absorbs every element. So we're not going to be doing that. We're going to try this approach and see how it works. Not very. We're going to do a little quick Googling. Okay, let's try that. Forest near Vector. Right here. Let's see how this works. So we're gonna fight a few of these enemies. They have a decent amount of they give a decent amount of magic points. They're not super hard. Seems reasonable. And while we do this grind, we're going to go back to our conversation about best suggestions for someone who has never played video games before. As a brief overview, the points that I was going off of as valuable things that I think I would look for in that type, or a game for that type of situation, were games with few or simple controls, games that had similar controls to other games in the genre so that they would be a good gateway, games that don't punish death or failure by undoing progress, not that don't have it, that don't have it, or where it doesn't completely undo everything you've done, basically. Games with save points, or infinite lives or continues, preferably with an autosave. I don't think I actually mentioned that last time. Also, that gold was leaked. And unfortunately, we're getting close on that already. That's okay. Games that don't punish early mistakes. Basically, games that don't screw you over for starting, or for the fact that you don't know what you're doing when you start. Like, something like Borderlands or Diablo, where you can, in like Diablo 2, you can't refund your points easily. Whereas in Diablo 3, you can rearrange your skill points however you want at any time. Games that don't have an inherently wrong way to play. So there's a lot of there are a lot of games where the way that basically in order to succeed you have to do one specific thing, and sometimes that's okay, sometimes there are better games. I would say. And then also to either games that have a clear direction or that encourage flexibility. So basically, there's some games that kind of leave you out in the water and don't really tell you exactly where to go and expect you to figure it out on your own, except there is a right way. A lot of early RPGs have that problem where you're just kind of wandering around aimlessly, and then you wander into somewhere you're not supposed to be at, and it just kills you. And then, of course, the last thing is just as a side note to make sure that they have the tools that they need to play the game, because if they don't have a good USB controller, or if they have don't have a what am I trying to say? They don't have a good USB controller, and they're trying to play a game that works best with a USB controller. And I had mentioned offhand games that appeal to them. Games that have you have to know the person well enough. You can't just make a general statement and say, all new gamers should be introduced with this, because you have to know the person. I did mention a lot of times, recently at least, especially, it seems like casual mobile games, especially ones that don't have time limitations, and ones that don't have a lot of microtransactions, are going to do well. I mentioned Bloons Tower Defense. It teaches a lot of basic things about, clicking, dragging, menus, strategy. If you do lose, it just takes you back and you start again. It's not a big deal. Same thing with a lot of things like a lot of Bejeweled clones, including Puzzle Quest. I mentioned Tetris. It's a classic for a reason. Especially I'll also just say there's a lot of cool variations on Tetris also. I mentioned for platformers, Mario All-Stars, and New Super Mario Brothers. I mentioned Spelunky, and I mentioned Knit. And from there, I would like to move on to some other genres, which I guess I wouldn't say are necessarily beginner genres all the time. Like, I don't think a lot of people start gaming with first-person games or first-person shooters. To an extent. I'll start off with the very obvious one, which is a fairly modern phenomenon. I think a lot of the next generation started with. And that is Minecraft. I have not played a lot of Minecraft, but from what I've seen and what I know of it, if somebody starts out in the exploration mode, you know, being basically God mode, they can get used to the game. There is no wrong way to do it. They wander around, they build things, they've got a first-person view, they have basic controls like in most first-person games. And it does have like survival mode and stuff that have a bit more of a challenge aspect to them, and there's a lot of mods that use the same system. Basically games built on that engine. That make it a great tool. Now, you may have to help them with figuring a lot of that stuff out, but it's a decent tool if you're trying to get somebody into gaming, and there's plenty of kids that are into gaming because of that game. Another one that I am particularly fond of is Refunct. You can check out my video of Refunct on my channel if you would like to know more about that one as well. But basically, it is a kind of a parkour style first-person game. You run around and you jump and you hit buttons, and that's the whole game. Playing it casually takes about half an hour, maybe an hour if you really don't know what you're doing. But it controls like a first-person shooter. There's no gun, there's no enemies, no death. It is very straightforward, and it seems like it would be a good way to teach somebody who's not used to those type of games how to move in a first-person environment. The other thing that comes to mind with that, or that's similar to that, is Portal. And that might be a next step up, but it's also a lot more engaging and a lot longer. Portal is a great game for new players to a first-person genre because there is a chance of death. There are enemies, but it isn't just a shooter. It isn't a shooter at all. You don't have a way to defend yourself. You have to be clever. It rewards creativity, but it is also very linear, and it has a lot of tutorial-like aspects to it. It takes its time easing you into the game. And I think that would be a great starting first-person shooter. Also, it's fun and funny. I mean, that's one of the big things I think with a lot of games that would kind of turn some people off if they're not used to gaming. Is a lot of games can be repetitive or intense in uncomfortable ways. And I feel like something that's a little lighter like that would be really good. Yeah, we're good there. We're kind of prepping for a very specific thing that's going to be coming up, so. I don't think he actually got any levels while he was learning it. That's too bad. Oh well. There's always later. Let's give him... Does he have any healing magic? No. Let's give him Seraph. So that's kind of my first thoughts on first-person games. They're all kind of games that fit that genre, but aren't necessarily shooters. And then I would say the next step would probably be something like Half-Life. Or one of the older shooter titles. I mean, honestly, most newer games are probably also decent at that as well. Even like Borderlands since it has a co-op mode. Once again, co-op is something I didn't specifically mention, but I think that people do tend to be more engaged and more interested in games when they have other people to play with. So yeah, that's my kind of first-person thoughts for those figures. I should have checked stats first. They all just gained levels right after I switched to the Espers. Oh well. Next one that came to mind was RPGs. Obviously, I like RPGs. And RPGs are probably a kind of hard genre to get somebody who is not a gamer into. The first thing that came to mind was actually Final Fantasy IV. I'm not sure how I feel about that, but it is a very linear RPG as far as the Final Fantasy series and most JRPGs go. You basically go from point to point. You don't have to customize your characters at all. Most of the time, you pick up an equipment and you use it because it is the next thing you picked up and therefore the next better thing. You go into the town, you buy the next best weapons. It's very linear, and while your party does change, you don't have control over it, so you can't do it wrong, basically. That being said, it's still not an easy game by any means, and I'll say that might be a good intermediate. Other things that came to mind... Actually, the next thing that came to mind is very simple, and that's Pokemon. Pokemon is great, and you can tell it's a great game for beginners because, once again, it's a game that is played by a lot of kids. And while those kids may not understand all the nuances of it, it's engaging enough and flexible enough that you can also just power through it and they will enjoy it. So, depending on how into it the person you're recommending it to is, especially the newer ones, are very good at walking you through step by step how things work. And another thing is there's lots of resources for it if they do want to get more into it. Now, that being said, it is also very complex, and it is something that is known as a thing for kids, or at least it was. I think Pokemon Go especially makes this a lot bigger pop culture thing where people could connect to it. And I would say that stuff like the new... getting somebody to go out and pick up the Sun and Moon games would probably not be that hard, especially if they tried Pokemon Go. And even if they hadn't played an RPG before, they'd probably be able to manage it. The other one that came to mind is actually a little bit more complicated because it has a secondary component to it besides just the menu-based RPGs. But I think it's still pretty intuitive, and I think I believe it's another one that was kind of intended, at least partially, to be accessible to kids. And that is Child of Light. Child of Light is gorgeous, first of all. The art style is gorgeous. It has the entire dialogue, narration and dialogue in the game is done in rhyme, which is kind of neat. And it has this very storybook feel. And I feel like that would make it very accessible to most people. It's something familiar, but it's still an RPG. And it actually has like talent trees and a secondary thing where you have to like move your mouse and you can click on enemies to like make them go slower and stuff. But again, it takes its time. It explains these things really well, and it ends up being pretty neat. It's on several consoles. It looks good. It's not an old pixelated game like this that that new players might be turned off from, and it has a good story. It has characters that are interesting, and it feels accessible. So I think that he still needs Asuna. Let's do a quick status check. Actually, I'm feeling pretty good here. Like, I think if we just finish off, let's see, he's got finished Catableops. It's a little way into, what is that? Rama. Yeah, I'll just put him on Rama. She's got decent on Madeline. Most of the way through Zone Seeker. Most of the way through Sarah. Yeah, so I'll finish these off. So yeah. I think that would be a good starting point for a lot of people. Another one that kind of bridges between two genres that I think would kind of fit that is Evoland. And the reason I say that is kind of weird, but I think it works. And I don't know this for sure. This isn't something I've tested, it's just a theory. Evoland is a parody of the evolution of RPGs and adventure games. So it covers like Zelda, and it covers like Final Fantasy. So the reason that it makes me think that it might be a good gateway is because it does introduce all of these different features step by step. You literally open a treasure chest to gain the ability to go left. I mean, it is that type of thing. I feel like that type of gameplay would be really good for someone who hasn't encountered those genres before, because it does introduce things one step at a time. It is basically a completely preventative tutorial where you cannot get ahead of yourself. Now, the downside is, it is a parody. And part of me would be afraid that they would not take that genre seriously as a result, because they would see all of the tropes dismantled before they played it. Or they may just not get it, because it is a parody of a thing they don't understand, and they may not understand why they're doing it, or why those jokes are there, or that they are jokes, and may not appreciate it in the same way that I do. And that's okay. We're gonna leave that as is. So yeah, that was just kind of my thought with Evoland as an RPG/adventure entry point. Next one I think is pretty obvious, and that is Zelda as an adventure game. I thought about it. The original Zelda is a little bit too freeform with a little bit too little direction. But I do think that A Link to the Past is very step-by-step. And I do think that Ocarina of Time is fairly step-by-step as you go through it. Now, those are very different types of adventure games, because one's 3D, but they, depending on which one is more accessible, those are both really good options in my opinion for teaching people about those types of games. They are full of map markers, they have a good difficulty curve, and they reward exploration. You find stuff when you wander, but you still have a clear path to follow. The last thing that came to mind is story-based games. Like the Telltale series. Games that are more of a visual novel with some interactive elements may be a way to breach that line for some people who are not into it, that aren't into games. Because it's basically visual story. Basically watching a TV show almost, but with some interactive elements where you get to walk around and make decisions. Sorry, I'm being very indecisive right now. I probably should be paying a little more attention, but that's okay. It's good music. So yeah, that was kind of my train of thought there. We're gonna go ahead and use I feel like we should grab Setzer. We probably should have been using Setzer in there instead of one of the other characters. Just gonna use Edgar. I'm trying to remember if there's stuff to steal from. I mean, I'm sure there's stuff to steal from, but I don't know if we need to. I think we'll be okay. You know what? Let's just throw it all out the window. Actually, you know what? Okay, we're gonna do a little more grinding. Just a little. Let's do... let's do this. This is gonna be a little bit shorter. And maybe a little familiar. So yeah, I feel like that's a pretty good overview of the types of games that would be good for somebody who isn't super familiar with games. Does he have any? Oh, good. He got 8 Seth? 8 Seth is done. Okay. Start on Seraph. Let's not start on Seraph. Bismarck, Ifrit. Okay, we're gonna keep this really simple to keep rolling. Gale Hairpin, Alarm Mirroring, Tabulum, Hermes, 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 sure. Okay. This may look familiar, as I said. And I'm dumb. So, I feel like that's a pretty good overview of game ways to introduce people to games. Like I said, there's a lot to it, and I know that all of this, even with all the stuff that I talk about, that doesn't even start to cover how this could work, what this could be. Pretty sure it's dead. A lot of the games I mentioned as offhand examples aren't necessarily the best for beginners by themselves. But I feel like depending on how fast people pick stuff up normally and how good they are with stuff close to that, there's definitely stuff that they could pick up very quickly. Like if somebody plays a lot of strategy games and chess and stuff, then yeah, giving them something, you know, you don't need to start them with the very early tactics games or whatever. You can, you know, if somebody is a big history buff and you think they'd get a kick out of Civilization, maybe they would appreciate it, even though it is somewhat complicated for someone. And again, there's difficulty sliders for a lot of those types of games, so it works out. We're doing this particular group, I am very briefly delving into, just to be very clear. I'm not planning on grinding this group nearly as long. I just figured I'd do the Gaia gear while I was doing it to get a few more. It's money. And they're still 2 AP. Did I not give Locke an Esper? Let's give him Rama. But yeah, no, like, stuff like Cuphead is really hard, but it does curve a bit, and it's not super punishing. You don't have the chance to miss anything. You can try as many times as you want. So if you have somebody who's very, who tends to not give up easily, someone who's very stubborn, that likes challenges, they might enjoy something like Cuphead or Shovel Knight. And you do get to try as many times as you want. And the money really doesn't matter, you can get more. And they're not going to 100% it the first time they pick it up, but they may have fun. And at the end of the day, that's what's going to make somebody being able to beat the game that they're playing isn't what's going to make somebody come back and play more. And that's, I think, the biggest thing for why I don't think starting somebody off with a really easy game is the right way to do it. I mean, some of those, yeah, it's not that they're easy, it's that they don't punish you. It's that it's not, you know, like the biggest difference between games like Cuphead and games like Battletoads, which is very much known for being the same type of punishing, or Battletoads is probably one of the more punishing games that exists, or Contra, something like that. Contra's not that hard. Contra's punishing. The problem with Contra is that it gives you 3 lives. The game itself isn't super hard. And most of the people who play games like that end up putting the 30 life code in. And I think that if you just started back at the beginning of the level and had to try again, type of thing, obviously that wouldn't work with the way that it's formulated, but if you did, that would be a different feel. It would have a lot more challenge to it. If it was, you know, you had 3 lives, but if you died, you started at the beginning of the level. I mean, games like Ghosts and Goblins have that same challenge level. You basically have infinite lives in Ghosts and Goblins. That doesn't make it easier, but it's a lot more accessible. It's going to take a while to level them up as much as I want, so I'm just going to get a little bit more. And that's fine. I guess I will also just take a moment and say, there are a lot of really neat, simple indie games that are probably also could be on this list. Some of which are fairly challenging still, but would be, you know, good. Stuff like what was it? Bastion. Bastion's a fairly hard game, but it only has a couple buttons. It's fairly intuitive once you figure out all the buttons. And it does have good tutorials. It walks you through stuff as you go. It gives you hints as you go, because you have this awesome voiceover. But it's a hard game. Same thing with stuff like, what was the other one that I'm trying to think of? There's a few, like, I keep thinking of Braid, and it's not Braid. It's the one with the shadow, like the whole art style is in silhouettes. But it's not a super long game. It's all platforming. There's also some like adventure game style ones, like There's one with a robot. I probably should have got... This is why I researched this beforehand and wrote it up, by the way. If you didn't notice, I'm not reading off a paper, but I made an outline for myself to talk about most of the major genres and come up with some ideas and to think about the qualifications. It's not like I'm coming up with that off the top of my head, obviously. But I've hit the bottom of my page. Okay. He's got a long way to go. I got the main thing I wanted. And the only person who's leveled up is the person who didn't need it. So I think we're done. I think we're gonna switch our party real quick to do one last errand. It's a very short errand. And then we're gonna take off and put our party together for the floating continent. And it is probably not going to be our best party, and I'm okay with that. I'm going to avoid using some of our better characters. That was it. Talking to that guy. He talks about Strago and tosses some shade. Okay. Well, it wasn't my intention to do this, but I feel like I can. And if you can, you know, let's grab a couple more little pieces of equipment. Grab another power sash, another tiara. And let's grab a couple more rods of each type. And another Hawkeye. I don't think we're... yeah, and some darts. I promise that'll make sense in a second. Okay. So I think we're gonna end this video here. We will spend the rest of our next video. We'll be gearing up and taking on the floating continent. I know this one was just a grind video. I'll make sure it gets labeled that way. You already knew that though. I apologize if you don't like listening to me babble, but I assume if you're here, that's at least part of the reason. So, we'll pick back up next time with the end of the world as we know it. The floating continent. We get a party of 3 to board the floating continent. And there are some really rough sections. There are also some interesting sections coming up. And we are going to get a 4th party member very shortly. So, if you did enjoy this, please give me a like and subscribe. Check out the other content on my channel. If you have any questions or suggestions, please leave them in the comments. And as always, have a good one.